set up the game of two-player Bohnanza, first, set up the game area. To do this, first locate the bean card deck and remove the 6 garden beans and the 4 cocoa beans. These will not be used during the game. After removing the necessary bean cards from the deck, shuffle the bean cards and place them face down in the middle of the playing area. Make sure to leave space next to the deck for a discard pile. Place the 3rd bean field cards in the box. These may be used later during the game, so make sure the box is still accessible. After setting up the game area, each player will set up their player area. To set up each player's area, both players will be dealt 5 cards. Any cards that a player is dealt will become their hand. Both players are allowed to look at their cards, but they may never rearrange them. Throughout the game, they will always keep their hand cards in the same order. After setting up the game area and each player's area, they are ready to start the game. During the game of two-player Bohnanza, players are trying to collect matching bean cards in fields in their player area. The trick is they are not allowed to rearrange their hand cards, so they must use strategic planting and harvesting to win the game. The goal is to score more gold coins than your opponent. The player to the left of the dealer will start as the active player. The active player will always do 4 steps during their turn. The first step of each player's turn is to plant or discard offered bean cards. During step 3 of each player's turn, they will decide whether or not to take the cards they flip up in the middle of the playing area. If the previous player decides to leave any of those cards, the next player will decide if they want the leftover cards or not. If they do not want the cards, they will simply discard them. If they decide they do want to take some or all of the piles of cards, they may take them now and plant them in one of their bean fields. Planting bean cards in a bean field means placing them face up in front of you in your player area. There are several rules players should know about planting beans in fields. Each player starts the game with 2 bean fields. At any time during the game, they may decide to buy a 3rd bean field. To buy a 3rd bean field, a player will remove 3 of their gold coins from the game by placing them face down in the game box. When a player has a 3rd bean field, they may plant 3 different types of beans. Players gain gold coins by selling beans, which will be explained later. When planting beans, a player may plant a bean in an open field with no other beans in it, or in a field that already contains beans of the same type, by placing that bean on top of the others. Each field can only hold 1 type of bean. During their turn, a player can also harvest beans to place a new type of bean there. When a player harvests beans, they may only harvest a field with 2 or more bean cards in it. The only time a player may harvest a field with less than 2 cards in it is if all of their fields have only 1 bean in them. When harvesting beans from a field, a player will always do the following steps. First, they will remove all of the beans from the field they are harvesting. Next, they will count the number of beans they are harvesting. This player is harvesting 5 coffee beans. Then they will look to the bottom of that bean card to its beanometer. This will tell the amount of gold coins they will gain for selling these beans. They will round the number of beans they are selling down to the nearest number on the chart. This player sold 5 coffee beans, so they will round that down to 4 and gain 1 gold coin. To represent the number of coins they gained, the player will flip over the appropriate number of bean cards to their coin side and discard the rest to the discard pile. Any gold coins they gain will go into their player area. After the player has either planted or discarded all of the offered bean cards, they will move into step 2. During step 2, the active player will plant bean cards and discard up to 1 hand card. The player whose turn it is must plant the top card of their hand into a field by setting it out face up in front of them. They will use the rules of planting as described earlier, and can plant in either an open field, on top of a matching field, or harvest a field to place a new type of bean. After a player has planted the first card, they may decide whether or not to plant a second card. If they choose to plant a second card, they may plant the top card of their hand. If they plant a second card, they will plant it in exactly the same way they do other cards. After a player has planted 1 or 2 cards, the final step is optional. The player may choose a card from anywhere in their hand to discard. If a player does not have any cards in their hand during Step 2, they will skip this step entirely. When a player has finished Step 2, they will move on to Step 3. During Step 3, the active player will draw, plant, and offer beans. To do this, they will first draw the top 3 cards from the draw deck and place them face up in the middle of the playing area. Next, they will look to the top card of the discard pile. If this card matches any of the 3 flipped up cards, they will add it to the flipped up card pile. Then they will look to the discard pile again. If this card matches, they will add it to that pile. They will continue this process until the top card of the discard pile does not match any of the cards. Now, the active player can plant any of these 3 piles of cards into their bean fields. As they plant cards into their fields, they may harvest them to make room for more beans. If a player chooses not to take any of the piles of cards, they will leave them in the middle of the playing area. These are the cards that the next player may choose to plant or discard during Step 1 of their turn. When the active player has completed Step 3, they will move into the 4th and final step of their turn. The 4th step of a player's turn is to draw 2 new bean cards. These cards will be placed in the player's hand. There is a special rule that players must follow when drawing new cards. When they draw new cards, they will take them one at a time and add them to the back of their hand. When the active player has finished drawing cards, their time as the active player is over, and they become a non-active player. The other player now becomes the active player and starts their turn at Step 1. The game ends when the draw deck runs out of cards. When this happens, a player will finish the step they are on, and then they will start the final scoring. When final scoring occurs, both players will first harvest the remaining bean fields and gain coins accordingly. Then they will set their hand cards aside. These are not directly used for scoring, but if there is a tie, they are the tiebreaker. The final step of final scoring is for all players to count up the gold coins they have earned during the game. The player with the most gold coins is declared the winner. In the event of a tie for most gold coins, the player who ends the game with the most hand cards is declared the winner.